All right, we are ready for part 4 of our content on explicit instruction, where we're focusing on the opening. We've already covered that. Now we're going to move to the I do, or the modeling portion of the body of an explicit instruction. And again, we're going to focus on just one part of the body, the first part, which is the I do. All right, so when we're talking about that I do, that modeling portion of his explicit instruction plan, what do we do? What does that look like? Well, one thing is that you're going to make sure that you're teaching just small, clear steps related to the task. So we're not suddenly just throwing the whole task at our students. We're breaking it down, remember, into those small, teachable steps. And we're going to do that using what is called a task analysis. And we're going to talk about that more in depth in just a minute. And you're going to have opportunities to practice here as part of your preparation for class. And we're going to be working on it in class. But before you ever teach, you are going to plan your teaching steps. And you're going to do that by breaking the big skill into small steps using a task analysis. Now, you're going to make sure that when you're in that I do, because you as the teacher are modeling what that behavior or what that skill looks like, you're going to make sure that you're not only explaining each step and you're doing it slowly at a pace that your students can understand, but you're also demonstrating it. Now, as you're explaining, what you're really doing is what's called a think aloud. So I want you to pay close attention right now, because this think aloud is the portion that sometimes students have a little bit more difficulty remembering to do. So you're not just showing the students, for example, how to solve a quadratic equation. You are thinking aloud, and you're sharing your reasoning. I'm doing this next step, and this is why I'm doing it. Up, I know this because I found it here. Or you're making those connections and you're doing it out loud. And the whole reason you're doing it is so the students can hear your thinking, your processing as you model that skill. You're going to make sure that when you're doing that modeling, that you're checking for understanding. We want to make sure that we're not, again, we don't just roll through lessons. We're checking and assessing, doing those informal assessments throughout the lesson, because we want to make sure, even in the modeling section, that our students are understanding and are able to follow what we're teaching. So, before we ever move to the modeling, remember I was telling you about a task analysis. So again, this is before you model, you plan for the modeling. You're going to plan for what that looks like. And the only way you can plan that is to actually take that skill, remember that complex skill, and break it into small, teachable, measurable steps. And that is what we call the task analysis. And so not only that, you're going to make sure that you're only teaching one step. You're going to teach one step at a time. We're going to move through it slowly, and you're going to do what's called chunking. So what we're doing is we're breaking again that big complex skill into smaller little chunks or steps. And we want to make sure that those steps aren't too big that it's overwhelming to a student and it's difficult for them to learn. And it's not so small that it takes us forever to learn it or our students get bored, for example. So when you break it into those small steps, remember that you're just going to teach one of them at a time. We're going to teach one of them at a time. And that could be one portion, it could be one section of something you're teaching, or it could be one step. So it's not always a step. Oftentimes in something like uh, when you're working in math, or sometimes when you're doing an experiment, you might be in science, you might teach step, but you might teach a portion of something, or you might only teach one section of it. And why do we do this? Why do we break it into these smaller steps? Why do we task analyze it? Well, the reason we do that is because it's easier for our students to learn, and it's easier for them to follow. So a student may not be ready to or able to in this current moment to master the whole entire skill or task or that behavior. behavior, but if we teach it in those smaller sections, they may be able to master one or a couple of steps at a time. So again, our goal is really to make our learning as easy as it can for our students. And so we're going to support and facilitate their learning. And one of the ways to do that is with the task analysis. And again, just making sure that those steps are just right for your student. So we have to make sure that we know our students. That's where that data comes in, and that's where those observations and really being, connected with your students is to know what is the right amount of content or information or steps to teach that student right now. Just right. All right. So when we're talking about that task analysis, again, what we're doing is we're breaking some kind of complex skill, or it could be an activity, into these smaller teachable steps. And again, it makes it easier for our students to learn that skill. It helps you teach because you don't have to teach all of it at once. You can teach one step or one section at a time. It allows our students to practice each of those steps. So again, imagine a quadratic equation being thrown at you and how difficult that would be if you have to learn the whole thing at one time. Now imagine if it were broken into, I'm just going to say 6 steps, and you learned step 1 first, and once you were proficient with step 1, then you learned step 2, and you did step 1 and 2 until you became proficient. And not only that, because it's broken into those steps, you can assess your students' learning at each of those steps, or I'm going to say steps, but no, it could be portions, sections, etc. You can assess students on each of those steps. So it also helps you to see where's a student struggling, or where do they need additional support? Where do I need to reteach them? But it also gives you the opportunity to give them feedback. Great job. You've got this. Or, hey, why don't you come over and sit with me for a minute and let's go over this part again. So it helps you to give them feedback, and then you can directly address where they might have a misconception or a misunderstanding. And so when you think about a task analysis, this is all it is. You break the big task into smaller steps. And so an easy way to understand that is to think about brushing teeth. So when we brush teeth, we don't just go in and brush teeth. There are a lot of things that we do before and after we brush our teeth. So if we're doing a task analysis, we're taking that task, we're analyzing it and break it into smaller steps. And so again, that's called a task analysis, or sometimes people say you're task analyzing something. This is important in special ed. You will task analyze, write task analysis your whole career and in your program now. So brushing teeth includes things like picking up the toothbrush, applying the toothpaste. If you don't teach that step, if your student doesn't get that, or your child, they're going straight from picking up the toothbrush to brushing your teeth. See why you got to teach each of those steps? So after you apply the toothbrush, you're going to brush the top, you're going to brush the bottom, you're going to brush your tongue, you're going to rinse your toothbrush, and then you're going to put it away. But task analysis and task analyses have to be individualized for every single student, because a student may need more than that. Maybe when they brush the top, if you don't tell them brush the back, brush the front, brush the back of your teeth, you might need to break that task analysis up into even smaller steps. Or the task analysis that I use may be different from the task analysis that you use. And here's an example. I would never apply the toothbrush to my toothpaste to my toothbrush and then start brushing my teeth. That's not how I do it. The way I do it is I apply the toothpaste and then I stick it under the water so my toothbrush is wet. I never brush my tongue, rinse my toothbrush, and then put my toothbrush away. I always dry my toothbrush before I put it away. I just with a towel or a washcloth or something like that, I dry it. So again, a task analysis has to be individualized, and you have to think about not only how small the steps are, but how does someone else do something. So it might be that you're teaching a student how to wash dishes. Well, you need to know how they wash dishes at home, because that's where they're going to be washing dishes. And so you need to mirror that. So again, individualize that, because we don't typically wash dishes a whole lot at school. Most often they're going to do it at home. So here's an example of a task analysis, and this applies directly to you. And so when you're answering any kind of like written comprehension questions, like the ones that I ask in the videos, this would be just one task analysis of how you might do that. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to read the question. You want to need to know what the question says. Then you're going to turn that question into a part of an answer and write it down. So if the question is, what are the steps to effective instruction? You're going to turn part of that question into the answer. You're going to say the steps to effective instruction are. Then you're going to think about the answer, or you're going to find it in like a book or something like that. Doesn't necessarily have to be a book, but it could be. After that, you're going to finish your sentence by including the answer in the sentence you started. Then you need to reread your answer to make sure it makes sense and to make sure that you answered all of the parts of the question. That is a task analysis, breaking answering written comprehension questions down into each of the steps. So let's talk about how small are the steps? How small do you make it? Now, again, but depends on your student. You have to know your students. And so here's an example. If I were teaching a student to wash clothes, I might have to have them sort it by color. So you're going to do whites, darks, and lights. Then they open the door of the washer. They put one pile of clothes only in the washer. They add the laundry detergent, they close the door, they set it to the regular cycle, and then they push start. Now, that's only one way. If we look at that, washing clothes has 7 steps for this student, but you could have a student for whom you have to be even more detailed. The steps have to be smaller. So what you might do is something like in that sorting by color, whites, darks, and lights just aren't enough. That student needs more support, smaller steps. So first what we're going to do is we're going to give them a sample of what a white clothing would look like, and then they're going to find all the white clothing. And then after that, we're going to do the same with the dark clothing, giving them that sample. Do it with the light clothing. And then what we want to make them, we want to do after that, remember breaking things into like those smaller steps. So after they're able to find it, when we give them a sample, the next thing we want them to be able to do is to distinguish whites from darks. And then we want them to distinguish lights from whites and darks, for example. And so you can see you might have to break the skill down into smaller steps. The other thing is we need to know what type of washing machine a student is using because there are different washing machines. So one task analysis may not work for every washing machine. You have to make sure that you individualize it. Now, what I want you to hear, I'm going to say this is super important. So listen to this. The best way to write a task analysis is to do the skill. Do the skill and write down every single step that you go through. And initially, you want to write even the teeny tiny steps because it'll help you then go back and say, no, I think I can make this I either need to make it more expansive or I can compress it and make it not as expansive. So hear that again. The best way to do it is to do it. A lot of people will try to think through what it's like. All right, let me think through what it's like to go out into my garage and get my plant soil and then plant repot a house plant. Can you tell what I'm doing right now? Well, that sounds like I could go through that in my mind, but it is not the same as doing it because likely if you're just doing it and you're just trying to recall, you might forget something. So actually do it and write down each of the steps. And that's what you're going to do in class. So I want you for class, you need to bring a pair of socks. Every single person needs to bring a pair of socks. I don't care what kind of socks, long socks, short socks, whatever they are. Because what you're going to do in class is the first thing you're going to do is you are going to write a task analysis for putting on your socks. That's what you're going to do. And you're going to put on your socks and write down every step. After that, I did move forward too fast. After that, what you're going to do is you are going to exchange it with the partner. You're going to compare your steps. Was your task analysis exactly the same? Does it have some of the same steps, or is it completely different? Does it have steps on one that there aren't on another? So again, working and practicing, because when you practice, when you have those opportunities to engage with the content and respond, your acquisition of skills increases. So we're going to do that in class. Now that's a fun one, putting on your socks. That's an easy one. But the next thing you're going to do is I'm going to give you a choice, and I'm going to give you choices within your emphasis area or areas, and you are going to get to choose which of these do you want to do a task analysis for. And then you can do an academic skill, a functional skill, a behavior skill, a communication skill, might be a social skill, but you get the choice. Now part of this is thinking about my students, and you are adults. And one of the things that's part of what's called adult learning theory is giving you choice. So you're going to have a choice. You're going to work with a partner. So someone within your emphasis area, and you are going to break whatever skill you choose down into those small teachable steps. And then again, what we're going to do is you're going to find that partner, and then you're going to switch with another group, and you're going to compare and share. We're going to look at those and see if you have the same steps or if they look different. All right, let's do a check-in. How are you feeling? How are you feeling about the beginning part of the I do modeling? And how are you feeling about task analysis? Share with me and let me know. And as always, make sure you write those questions down, okay? I'll see you in the next video.